You've driven past one. I'm almost certain of it. You were on some interstate, half listening to a podcast, and off to the right there were two fat concrete towers with steam rolling off the top, sitting in a field like they'd been dropped there by accident. You thought about it for maybe 4 seconds. Huh, nuclear plant, and went back to the podcast. I grew up in Illinois, which has more reactors than any other state, so those towers were just landscape to me. Braidwood on the way to my grandmother's house. You stop seeing them. They're wallpaper. But here's what I didn't understand until I was 31 and sitting in a conference room with a spreadsheet open. That thing off the highway is one of the strangest financial objects ever created in this country. It is not really a power plant. I mean, it is, obviously, but financially, it's a bond. A 60-year bond with a nuclear reactor bolted to the front as a delivery mechanism, and almost nobody has ever made money building one. That's the part that gets me. Plenty of people have made fortunes owning one, just never the people who built it. So let's take that apart. Why a company spends $36 billion on something and calls it a catastrophe, while another company buys the exact same kind of asset for scrap and calls it the trade of the decade. And why, in 2026, the most boring industrial assets in America became the most fought over. A nuclear plant is a two-number business. Everything else is noise. 1, it costs an insane amount to build. 2, it costs almost nothing to run. That's the whole shape of it. Every bankruptcy, every windfall, every political fight in this industry comes out of the collision between those two numbers. Compare it to gas, which is what nuclear actually competes against. Combined cycle gas is cheap to build and expensive to feed. Gas prices go up, your costs go up in real time. You're a commodity trader who happens to own a turbine. Nuclear is the mirror image. Fuel is a rounding error around $5 to $6 per megawatt hour across the US fleet. Operating costs, meaning people and maintenance and security and paperwork, run around 19 or 20. Add ongoing capital, and the all-in generating cost for the American fleet averaged about $34 a megawatt hour in 2024. $34 to make power around the clock in July at 3 in the morning in a blizzard. Hold that number, because now we look at what it costs to get there. Plant Vogtle, Waynesboro, Georgia. In 2009, they approved 2 new reactors next to 2 existing ones. Certified estimate, about $14 billion. First unit online around 2016. Unit 3 started commercial operation in 2023. Unit 4 in 2024. And depending on whose accounting you use, there are several sets. And they disagree. The total landed between 31 and 37 billion. 15 years. Roughly 2.5 times the budget. I want to be fair, because the internet isn't fair about Vogtle. Westinghouse, the company designing the reactors, went bankrupt mid-construction like your architect dissolving into vapor while the 3rd floor is being poured. There was COVID. There were design changes approved while things were being built. The most expensive possible sequence. But even granting every excuse, the number lands around $15,000 or $16,000 per kilowatt. A gas plant is about $1,000. Utility-scale solar, depending on the year, somewhere around $1,100 to $1,400. I had a colleague named Priya who built the project finance model for a nuclear proposal that never got off the ground 2019, before any of the current excitement. One of the sharpest modelers I've worked with. And she showed me something on her screen I still think about. She'd built the base case. Then she opened a tab that was nothing but interest during construction. Here's what nobody tells you. When you borrow $20 billion and the asset produces 0 revenue for 12 years, the interest doesn't wait politely. It compounds. It gets capitalized into the cost of the plant. Priya's model showed financing alone could account for north of 1/3 of the final price tag in a long build. She looked at me and said, "The reactor isn't the expensive part. Time is the expensive part." Best sentence anyone's ever said to me about this industry. A year of delay doesn't just add a year of labor. It adds a year of compounding on a mountain of debt that isn't earning a dime. Delay is the cost overrun. So, why is it so slow? Partly regulation, and I'll be careful here because people get ideological in both directions. The NRC is strict. Certifying a design and licensing a site takes years before a shovel moves. Some of that is theater. A lot isn't one bad day in Pennsylvania. In 1979, froze new construction for 30 years, and the regulator remembers. But the bigger issue is what economists call first-of-a-kind cost. America built about 100 reactors between the 60s and the 90s, then stopped. We lost the supply chain. We lost the welders who can do nuclear-grade work. We lost the project managers who'd done it before. France built 56 reactors in about 20 years and got cheaper as they went. Same design, same crews. We built Vattel as a one-off, with a workforce that had never done it, using a design nobody had finished. Here's the cruel part. MIT's Nuclear Center ran the numbers and figured a second AP1000 could plausibly land around 4,300 a kilowatt, and by the 10th one, maybe 2,900. The learning curve is real. Somebody just has to eat the first one. And here that somebody was Georgia ratepayers, which is the honest answer to who pays for a nuclear plant. In a regulated state, you do, slowly, on your utility bill, for decades. Okay, that was the bad news. Now let me tell you about Dale. A few years back, I was in Georgia for something unrelated. Ended up at a diner outside Waynesboro and got talking to a guy at the counter who turned out to be a senior reactor operator. 22 years in the control room. I asked what the job was like. He said, "It's the most boring job in America. That's the point. When it's interesting, something's wrong." Then he flipped my whole mental model. A nuclear plant doesn't ramp up and down. It doesn't chase prices. It runs flat out, always, and the American fleet has gotten extraordinarily good at it. Capacity factor across US reactors is now over 92%. Meaning across a full year, the average reactor produces more than 92% of what it could if it ran at full power every second. 92. Wind is in the 30s, solar in the 20s. Even gas plants usually sit around 50 or 60 because it's not always economic to run them. And the downtime is scheduled. They refuel every 18 to 24 months, and the average outage now runs about 34 days. It used to be closer to 100. That one improvement added the equivalent of several new reactors to the grid without pouring a yard of concrete. Dale said something else I typed into my phone. We've got the next 18 months of fuel sitting in the building. Uranium could triple tomorrow. Doesn't change my Tuesday. Think about that as a financial position. Your input costs are locked, physically, on site, a year and a half at a time. Your output gets more valuable every time the grid tightens. You are short nothing and long everything once it's built. Which brings us to the trade. My friend Marcus, I'll describe him as aggressive and let you fill in the rest, started buying merchant nuclear exposure around 2020 when the sector was being written off as a stranded asset. And I mean written off. Vermont Yankee, gone. Indian Point, gone. 3 Mile Island, Unit 1, shut down in 2019 because it couldn't clear market prices. Cheap gas had crushed wholesale power, and plants with a $30 cost structure were losing money in markets clearing in the low 20s. Owners were begging states for subsidies. Some got them. Some switched the lights off. Marcus's thesis, which I told him over beers was insane, went like this. Construction risk is the only thing that kills you in nuclear, and on an existing plant, that risk is already in the past. Somebody else's shareholders ate it. What's left is a machine with a $30 cost structure, an 80-year potential life, and zero chance anyone builds a competitor. He was buying the asset for a fraction of what it would cost to replace, from sellers who were terrified of it. Then 2 things happened. First, the Inflation Reduction Act created a production tax credit just for existing nuclear plants, Section 45U, up to $15 a megawatt hour if you meet prevailing wage rules. And the design is clever. The credit shrinks as your revenue rises and vanishes entirely above roughly $44 a megawatt hour. It's a floor, not a handout. Congress wrote a put option under every existing reactor in America and handed it to the owners for free. It runs through 2032. Second thing that happened, artificial intelligence. I have a friend named Jenna who does site selection for data centers. Her job used to be fiber routes and property taxes and whether the water table could handle cooling. Now, she says, it's one question. Where can I get a gigawatt and how fast? And she said something last year that reframed the whole sector for me. We're not buying electrons. Anyone can sell us electrons. We're buying certainty. A hyperscaler building a multi-billion-dollar AI campus can't have it idle because it's cloudy or the wind died, and they've made carbon commitments. So they need enormous, constant, carbon-free power available for 20 years at a price they can put in a model today. Exactly one thing on the American grid does all four. So look what happened. Microsoft signed a 20-year power purchase agreement with Constellation in 2024 to restart 3 Mile Island Unit 1, the one shut down in 2019 as uneconomic, now renamed the Crane Clean Energy Center. 835 megawatts, all of it to Microsoft. Roughly a $1.6 billion project, backed by a $1 billion DOE loan that closed in late 2025. And this summer, the last major grid obstacle cleared. Target is 2027. Sit with that. A plant that was worthless in 2019 became the anchor of a 20-year contract with one of the most valuable companies on Earth. Palisades in Michigan shut in 2022, bought by Holtec, restarted with a $1.52 billion federal loan. First recommissioning of a retired U.S. reactor in history. Duane Arnold in Iowa is next. Google signed with Kairos, Amazon with X-Energy. Meta committed to something on the order of 5 gigawatts. Across the industry, a dozen plus announced deals totaling close to 10 gigawatts. Marcus has not shut up about this since. Now, I'd be doing you a disservice if I stopped there, because 3 liabilities in this business never make the exciting headlines. The first I learned about from a woman named Denise in asset management, who ran a portfolio I'd never heard of, nuclear decommissioning trusts. Every reactor in America is required to build a savings account for its own funeral. Money comes in over the operating life, sits in a trust outside the company's control, and can only ever be spent tearing the plant down. The NRC's formula puts the minimum between roughly 280 and 612 million per reactor, and real site-specific estimates often run well above that. Denise described her job as managing a pension fund for a building. Same risk as a pension too. If assets underperform the liability, somebody has a very expensive problem in 30 years. Industry-wide, those trusts have historically run short of full projected cost, and the gap gets closed or doesn't by market returns. Second liability, the used fuel. In 1982, the federal government legally promised to take spent fuel and put it somewhere permanent. Utilities paid into a fund for decades on that promise. The repository never got built. Yucca Mountain is politically dead. So the fuel sits on site, over 90,000 metric tons in casks and pools at the plants that made it. And because Washington broke the contract, the government pays damages more than $10 billion out of the judgment fund as of a few years ago, climbing annually. Meaning if you own a nuclear plant, you also own a permanent, indefinite storage facility you never asked for and can't get rid of. The site is never fully clean. Third, insurance. You cannot insure a nuclear accident on the open market. Nobody will write it. So Congress built a system where each site carries a primary policy around $500 million, and every reactor in the country is on the hook for a retrospective assessment if something serious happens anywhere. Pool it, and you get somewhere in the neighborhood of $16 billion of industry-funded coverage. Very large number. Also, on a truly bad day, not a large enough one. The federal government is the ultimate backstop, which is another way of saying American nuclear has always been a public-private hybrid, whatever the investor deck says. There's one more stakeholder finance people never talk about. I did some work in a small Midwestern town a while back and met a guy named Bill who ran the hardware store. Their plant had closed a few years earlier, and Bill walked me through what that actually meant. The plant hadn't been a big share of the county's tax base. It had been the share. The schools ran on it, the roads ran on it. 600 jobs averaging over 100 grand, plus 1,000 contractors flooding in every refueling outage, filling hotels and restaurants and his store. All of it left over about 18 months. The school district went to referendum. Everybody's property tax rate went up. Bill said they didn't close a factory, they closed the tax base. That's why closures become governor's office problems and why states passed credit programs to keep plants alive. Own a nuclear plant and you own enormous political leverage because you're often the largest taxpayer in your county, not on the balance sheet, absolutely part of the asset. So what about small modular reactors? The thing everyone's excited about. Honest answer. I want them to work, and I'm not underwriting them yet. The pitch is genuinely good. Build reactors in a factory instead of a muddy field. Make each one small enough that no single unit can bankrupt the parent. Get down the learning curve by building 50 instead of one. Problem is, the pitch has been the same for 15 years. And the first serious American SMR project, NuScale's Idaho deal, died in 2023 when the target price kept climbing and the customer utilities walked. Smaller reactors lose economies of scale, and you only win that back through volume manufacturing nobody has built yet. There's real motion now. Test reactors hitting criticality, Doe writing cost share checks, hyperscalers signing. And crucially, a customer willing to pay a premium for speed instead of demanding the lowest price, exactly what a first-of-a-kind technology needs. But the first commercial SMR fleet will be expensive. Somebody eats that. Watch who volunteers, because that tells you who actually believes. Let me bring this home. Here's what I think a nuclear power plant actually is, financially. It is not a power business. It's a machine that converts a terrifying front-loaded pile of capital into 80 years of near-fixed cost cash flow with the entire risk compressed into the first decade when it produces nothing at all. Which means the value of the asset has almost nothing to do with physics, and almost everything to do with who's holding it when the construction risk resolves. Georgia Power built Vogtle and got a rate increase and a decade of misery. Constellation bought plants nobody wanted and now sells the output to Microsoft on 20-year terms. Same technology, same steam, same steel. Completely different business, entirely because of when they showed up. That's the reframe I'd leave you with. In most industries, the builder captures the value and the buyer pays a premium. In nuclear, it's inverted. The builder eats the risk, the second owner eats the returns. It's been that way for 50 years. And every time the market forgets, somebody spends $30 billion relearning it. And now those towers off the highway aren't wallpaper. They're the scarcest asset on the grid because we spent 30 years deciding not to make any more of them and then invented something that needs power that never blinks. Next time you drive past one, look a little longer. That's not just steam. That's a 60-year contract, a small-town school budget, a federal insurance pool, a savings account for its own demolition, and probably somebody's AI model running 3 states away. If this was useful, subscribe. I take apart the real economics of businesses like this every week, the ones nobody explains properly. And drop me a comment with the asset you want next. I read all of them, and half my best video ideas come from you. See you in the next one.